Mom. It's her going into the house.
She walks in. That was it.
A mom is missing. This beautiful blonde, very young and vivacious woman.
Everybody was starting to reach out, and nobody had heard from her.
I tried to message her to her. I've tried to call her on Messenger.
Police had to look at those facts and say she could just be off the grid right now.
We don't have a crime scene. We don't have an obvious crime.
There's no body. There's no murder weapon.
Right here.
Yeah.
It's gonna look like he's dragging something. What the hell did we just watch?
Billings, Montana, 2018. The fiercely independent city on the edge of the Rocky Mountains is in the middle of an economic boom. It's here that 49-year-old Laura Johnson has come to experience her own independence after years of raising her children.
Yep. Yeah, that's probably the best picture of my mom. All I know is my mom got some 80s hair going on, and my dad actually has a full set of hair. Seeing all of us as an actual family, holy smokes.
Laura grew up in Vancouver, Washington, and met her future husband Howard there when she was 18.
By the time my mom was 23, she had 5 boys. She loved the fact that she was a mother. She always told us, I would never regret having all of you kids. She was extremely loving, and she was amazingly funny as well, and she gets that from her dad, who's just a jokester at every turn.
She was a wonderful mom, always helped with everything, always treated everybody like their family.
My dad worked the regular 9 to 5. Mom stayed at home, raised the kids. She was very nurturing.
She did everything. Every night she'd cook dinner. And for the amount of people that we had, I felt like it was a lot, but she made it look always easy, so.
She always made it a deal to have a good meal. Big old feast. My entire career has been in food service, and that's mostly due to the fact that I grew up cooking in the kitchen with my mom.
But in 2012, their children grown and out of the house, Laura and her husband Howard separate, and Laura moves to the Las Vegas, Nevada area.
I definitely think she wanted to find her own sense of happiness. You know, a woman in her 40s having that for the first time, that's got to be empowering, you know what I mean? So she did tell me that she had joined a dating app.
And it isn't long before Laura meets someone she really likes. His name is Greg Green.
Greg was one of the people who she was matched with. He worked in Vegas right there. They went out on a couple of dates, and then it went to the point where she was living with him in Nevada.
Although she now lives 1,000 miles away from her family in Vancouver, Washington, Laura keeps in regular touch with her sons.
My mom was never really good about keeping a cell phone. So our main points of communication were Facebook.
She was consistently on Facebook. Like, you can click on Messenger and her little thing would be green.
In July of 2018, Greg Green gets a job in Billings, Montana. Laura follows him there in August, and soon after, she lands a job at a Papa John's restaurant. After her first day at work, Laura calls her son, Stephen.
I remember the last time that I talked to her on the phone was when she was driving home. It was literally just, talk to each other, see how life's going, have some laughs. But it's not until you look back, you wish you did more with your time, you know?
On September 18th, 2018, Laura's sons become concerned that she has stopped communicating with them.
My older brother, Howard Jr., he spoke to my mom every day. He called me and said, "Hey, have you guys heard from Mom?" And I haven't heard from her. I looked on Facebook. It said that she hadn't been active for a couple days. So then I called Steven. I was like, "Hey, have you talked to Mom?"
Jonathan called me on the 18th. The fact that Jonathan had even called me in the first place was a huge red flag. Because if there was a way to get a hold of her, he totally could have, you know what I mean? But now he's at the point to where he's like, I need help. I called my mom, and every time the phone goes straight to voicemail. I've tried to message her, I've tried to call her on Messenger, I've tried to call her job, and the job is just like, yeah, she hasn't shown up for work since September 13th. Like all of this, and I'm coming up with nothing.
Nobody had heard from her.
I called Greg. He picked up. He says, came home from work on the 13th, and she was gone. All of her stuff's gone. All of it. I don't know anything. He doesn't know where she is.
September 24th, 2018. Laura's sons have been trying to reach her for 6 days.
So then I started calling the police department out there.
We asked the Billings, Montana Police Department to do welfare checks.
Officers went to Miss Johnson's residence to attempt to make contact and speak with her. The gate was locked. There was 2 large dogs in the yard. They weren't friendly. The house was quiet, and they weren't able to make any contact. Officers went to Miss Johnson's work and was advised that her last day of work was on the 13th, and she had not been to work since then.
Detectives tracked down her boyfriend, Greg.
When officers spoke with Gregory, he told him that on the 13th he had gone to work. And when he returned that day, he found that she was gone and she had packed her 2 red suitcases that she had brought with her and had left. The majority of people that contact police departments looking for their loved ones or wanting welfare checks done, those people are found eventually. You know, maybe they did go on a vacation and they didn't tell somebody. I think a lot of people, with the fast-paced life that we have, people want to take a break, they want to disconnect from life, and that can be something you have to take into consideration when looking for people.
What the law enforcement officers told me was, you're telling us that she's missing. We're not saying wrong, but we don't have enough information to say that you're right. The fact that it was a grown woman, people believe that if they aren't being found, it's because they don't want to be found. And anybody who knows my mom in this situation know that that's fundamentally not true. So the sense of like, something's happened became very real.
It's been 13 days since anyone has had any contact with Laura, and her family is getting anxious.
I posted a picture of my mom, and he said, "We have not heard from my mom." And just to explain the situation, a lot of people commented on there.
The post was getting a ton of shares. I thought that the whole thing was just strange. The fact that, her sons haven't heard from her. We don't know where she is. She hasn't showed up to her job yet. She's not responding to text messages. The first thing that I do when I see something like that is I do reach out to law enforcement.
September 27th of 2018, I did receive a call from one of the local reporters regarding a Facebook post involving Laura Johnson. So the next thing I did after I got off the phone was started to research the case. While we haven't reached the level that there was a crime committed, things were starting to fall in place that not everything was right.
Investigators find baffling clues in Laura's disappearance.
There was a recent phone ping from Washington that showed that the phone had been there on September 26th.
And learn of a troubling past.
She had a prior addiction, and she could just be off the grid right now.
I'm not just going to sit here. The next logical step was to go to Montana.
September 27th, 2018. Laura Johnson's family has not heard from her in 2 weeks. Her boyfriend, Greg Green, tells police he hasn't seen her since September 13th, which was also the last day she was at work.
At this point, it's still unknown where she's at, unknown if there's foul play involved. We just had not gotten any information conclusive one way or the other.
Police ask Laura's son, Stephen, if there is anything going on in her life they should know about. Stephen tells them that years before, she was injured and that she became addicted to prescription painkillers. But at the time of her disappearance, she was getting treatment and doing well.
There was a feeling that potentially she may have relapsed due to her addiction.
Police had to look at those facts and say, well, she does have a history of use. She had a prior addiction, and she could just be off the grid right now.
Detectives reach out to the clinic where Laura has been going for treatment.
The clinic advised me that she had been there every single day for 3 weeks prior to the 13th.
If Laura has relapsed, detectives know she could be in hiding somewhere. They go back to Greg Green, hoping he can help focus the search. But he doesn't have anything to add to his previous statement that Laura had moved out on September 13th, and he hasn't seen her since.
He was quite cooperative. He consented to a search of his home. Officers didn't locate any items that they thought were suspicious at that time. And Gregory had allowed them to look through his phone, which he showed them some messages that he had sent to Laura after she had left.
We don't have an obvious crime. We just know that she's been missing.
Investigators subpoena Laura's phone records, and when the data comes in, there's a glimmer of hope that Laura is alive and well.
There was a recent phone ping from Washington that showed that the phone had been there on September 26th.
Detectives wonder if Laura went back to her hometown of Vancouver, Washington, where her sons and ex-husband live.
From an investigative standpoint, it made sense because that's where some of her support network would be.
Sergeant Billings called and said, I got some great news for you. I was like, oh, she did show up in town. I got excited.
Laura's sons immediately start searching all over Vancouver for her.
Me and my wife drove around for 2 hours to every business that was open, showing pictures of my mom, asking if anybody had seen her. So I was like, if she's in town, she's obviously would be at one of the hotels for sure. None of the hotels are like, nope, haven't seen her. Nobody's seen her. Not a single person.
Laura's sons are disappointed that there is no sign of her. Then they get disturbing news. The investigators made a mistake when tracking Laura's phone.
When they pinged my mom's phone, they pinged the last incoming call, and it was my dad. And it was on his birthday, because he spoke to my mom every year on his birthday. He knew everything that was going on, and he's like, well, it's my birthday, so hopefully she answers.
Laura never answered that call, and detectives realized that she was never in Vancouver. been 18 days since Laura Johnson disappeared, and her son Stephen decides he has to take action.
And being all the way in Washington and realizing that I wasn't going to get an answer, that was the next logical step, was to go to Montana. I was like, I'm not just going to sit here.
I couldn't let him go alone.
They said to themselves, we're going to just get in the car and we're going to drive 14 hours over to Billings and we're just going to go look for her ourselves.
So the first place that we went was the police station. And what they tell us is, as long as I didn't break the law, I could do anything. I had inclinations about who the person Greg was, and none of that ever sat right with me.
Stephen calls Greg, looking for more details about the last time he saw his mother.
He picked up, it was him. You know, who are you? What is this? Hangs up the phone. So I went to his house. I was yelling my mom's name. I'm yelling Laura. I'm yelling Mom. I think that she's in there. And then that's when he lets the dogs out. So I go up to the dogs, and they're loud, but they're not dangerous at all. So I just bent down and started petting the dog, you know. And that's when he came out of the trailer and lights a cigarette, and he's, you know, can I help you? And I tell him, I was like, I'm Stephen Johnson. Like, Laura's my mother. I believe you know where she is, and I would like you to tell me. And he's like, no, I came home, and she was gone. He's very cocky. He's just standing there smoking his cigarette. So I told him, I believe you know where my mother is. I will be the one to put you behind bars, and I'll be the end of you. So he tells me to leave, and he calls the cops on me.
October 1st, 2018. Stephen Johnson has driven from his home in Vancouver, Washington to Billings, Montana to try to find his missing mother, Laura. After a disturbing encounter with Laura's boyfriend, Greg Green, Stephen's next step is to create flyers and post them all over Billings.
When we went anywhere, we handed these out. So we went to Greg's work, and we put them all over his window at work, and then he tore them all off.
We were like texting, we're like, all right, has anybody heard? Like, we want to know, like, what's going on?
We woke up 8 o'clock every single morning with a place to go to, an idea in mind, with somebody to talk to just try to find something. So at the end of every day, I'm calling my brothers, telling them, here's what we did. Here's who we talked to.
It was very frustrating because this is like what you see on TV. I never thought in my life I would ever go through it.
One of the hardest things for me was dealing with frustrations with the family, understanding their concerns, understanding their desire to have, swift justice.
We can't just go to Mr. Green's residence and knock the door in and do a search without a warrant. We've got proper legal procedure. And at that time, we were lacking enough information to use the search warrant process in order to further develop Ms. Johnson's case.
It was frustrating not being able to get a real reaction. So it just felt like our duty to prove it.
We've talked to everybody who we can. We've been to the doctor's office. We've been to the Salvation Army. Everything comes up empty. We had gone through every single dead end. We had been through all of Greg's neighbors with no answer, with no solution. We were nowhere closer on day 5 than we were on day 1. And the last thing before we leave town that we figure we can do is go knock on the neighbors' houses again.
As they are knocking on the door of the neighbor across the street from Greg, Stephen sees something he hadn't noticed before.
I basically stopped and I said, "Hey, I think we found something. There is a camera at the one place that we're interested in."
It points right at the driveway of where Greg and Laura lived.
Stephen and Casey had talked to the owner a few days before. Now, they ring his doorbell again, hoping to get access to the footage.
And the first thing he says is, "Do you want to see?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "I have my camera footage pulled up because you were asking me about your mom." He invites me in, and for the next 35 minutes, I'm just on his floor looking at a bunch of video. So the first thing we pull up is September 13th, the last day she went to work. And then Casey's recording it on her phone. You could speed it up. So we're going through. So we're watching the camera footage. And then this is where it gets very interesting. It's him. Right here.
Keep playing.
And what happens is Greg gets home first. Greg gets home and parks his truck and goes inside. And 35 minutes later, right here, my mom gets home. Right there. So, that's mom.
Blonde hair.
It is 7:07 on September 13th.
God looks excited
That's
to
her.
see her.
It's her going into the house. We were told time and time again that Greg's story is, I came home and she was gone. I came home and she was gone. She had taken all of her stuff and it was gone. So we got him. He was lying. But, well, where is she? So we're watching the footage. Day turns to night.
What time is it?
Right now,
11:27? 10:27?
10:27.
There he is. The headlamp?
Put lamp on. We see Greg throughout the entire night. Right here, right here.
Yeah.
It's gonna look like he's dragging something back. Just moving. Going back and forth between the house.
That's when we call the detectives, like, you need to come see this.
Stephen Johnson has discovered home security footage of his missing mother, Laura. It shows her at the house she shared with Greg Green after the time Greg told police she had left. Realizing the importance of the discovery, he calls the police.
Approximately 10:45 that night, I go to that neighbor's house and we watch the footage in question. We then start viewing the video in greater detail. And it was definitely very concerning.
The detective's trained eye spots something that Stephen and Casey missed.
The footage shows the area of the driveway where Laura Johnson is observed coming home that evening, and she's exiting the vehicle and walking toward the trailer. Gregory, he's also seen going back into the garage and coming out with 2 red-colored suitcases in that vehicle as well.
The same 2 red suitcases that Greg told officers that Laura had taken with her when she moved out. And then, the detective sees something that changes the investigation from a missing persons case to something much more disturbing.
And you can see him walking out with that large, heavy object. That's zoomed in to show that area of the vehicle where he puts what we believe is Laura's body into the vehicle. And then ultimately he's observed putting a shovel in the back of the pickup bed before he leaves that evening just after 7 p.m. We believe that more than likely that is her body, but we need a lot more evidence to prove that at this point. That was kind of a gut-wrenching feeling to know that you just observed somebody's last moments.
What the hell did we just watch? The only logical answer is, Greg ended my mother's life that night. And finally dawns on me, after all of this, that I'll probably never get to see my mom again. Is that I'll never get another goodbye. I'll never get that closure. I'll never get the last I love you. I'll never get any of it. It's just gone.
But unless police can prove that it is Laura's body on the video, they don't have a crime. On October 5th, 3 weeks since Laura was last seen, Billings police asked Greg to come into the station for questioning.
Gregory told us what he had initially told officers. He told us that on the 13th, when he got home that evening, she was gone and her 2 red suitcases were gone.
In that video, it shows Greg pulling those suitcases out of the house and packing them up in his truck.
He seemed very surprised when we told him that there was video, and then he decided that he didn't want to talk to us anymore. We informed him that he was not going to be allowed to go back to his home. We believed that that was a crime scene at this point. The vehicle he drove to the police department was impounded at that point.
We have now crossed into full-on criminal investigation. We do believe a crime has committed.
We had probable cause at that point to seek a search warrant for his residence. But we didn't have enough information to that point to make an arrest. We executed that search warrant that evening and began to process the trailer where Gregory and Laura lived. One of the first things that we noted was the strong odor of new carpet smell. In the back room of Gregory's home, it was obvious that the carpet had been replaced very recently, and that was suspicious to us.
But because police find no proof that Laura is dead, they have to release Greg.
At this point, we still don't have a body. We still haven't located Miss Johnson. There was not enough to arrest Mr. Green for the disappearance of Miss Johnson.
It's a crushing blow to the family.
After them basically telling him, hey, we know you're lying, they let him go.
The entire family was, really upset. Because you have all this video, but you don't arrest him. Why?
There's a lot of frustration, but I would say it was mainly based around, this guy did all of this, and we could just see right through him.
We We work closely with the county attorney's office and trying to determine, what more we need to get to that point to make an arrest. I had to remain focused on what needed to be done to build a case against him.
While the forensics team examines Greg's seized work truck, detectives have a strategy to keep an eye on Greg.
One of the last things we did when we searched the residence is we placed a tracker on his vehicle. We believe that he did more than likely take Laura's body to some location to bury her. We placed the tracker on with the hope of he might go back out to the location.
The tracker is placed on Greg's personal car, the same one that Laura is seen driving on surveillance video on September 13th. On October 5th, hours after his interview with detectives, Greg Green starts to move.
At approximately 10 p.m. that evening, his vehicle started to move towards the interstate, headed west outside of Billings. So we began to follow him. He drove straight through the night, and we realized that he was leaving the state.
October 5th, 2018. Greg Green is the prime suspect in the presumed murder of Laura Johnson. Lacking evidence of a crime, detectives have to let Greg walk free. But they have placed a tracker on his car, and he appears to be leaving Billings, Montana, in a hurry.
His vehicle started to move towards the interstate and headed west outside of Billings.
Detectives track Greg as he drives for 16 hours across 5 states to his old hometown in Henderson, Nevada.
If you're being interviewed by police about the whereabouts of your ex-girlfriend and you just hightail it out of town, it's not a good look.
We were coordinating with law enforcement where he was at. They knew that we were tracking him. They would do drive-bys, make sure that we knew his whereabouts.
Meanwhile, Billings police continue the search for evidence to arrest Greg. Using his cell phone data, they track Greg's movements during the night of September 13th, which leads them to the local Walmart.
We were able to locate footage of him going to Walmart that evening. And when he went through the self-checkout, we did see a very distinct abrasion on his face, which we thought was very suspicious at that point.
Then, another crucial piece of evidence emerges from the forensic search of Greg's impounded work truck.
I noticed that the vehicle was very clean. It had been washed recently. So after 2 days processing that vehicle for biological material, taking swabs from various locations on the seat, we found 3 very, very small 1 to 2 millimeter stains that appeared to be blood.
That evidence came back from the crime lab, and sure enough, it was Laura's blood.
The totality of all of the evidence that we had located, including the blood on the door of that truck, and together with video footage showing him carrying out what we believed was Laura's body, at that point there was enough evidence to arrest him.
Hey, Greg. I remember you. You remember? Alright. So you know why we're here? I imagine so, yes. Okay. So, something you changed for something like this, or? Well, we have a warrant for your arrest for deliberate homicide, so that's what's changed. That's why you're here in handcuffs. Okay. And you'll be expected back to Billings. Huh. For deliberate homicide. Deliberate homicide. Deliberate homicide. Do you want to tell us what happened with her when she came home that night
And what you did with her, that's your decision. I'm not going to press you. That's what I want to know.
I did everything that I know already.
Okay, well, we both know that's not true still. If you don't want to talk to me, we'll end that there. Okay?
After being held for 7 months in a Nevada jail, Greg is extradited to Billings. More than a year later, in February 2020, his trial is set to begin. But without Laura Johnson's body, a conviction is far from a sure thing.
We had a theory of what we believed happened, but we just didn't have a body. This is the very first case that I've ever had that involves a no-body homicide arrest. When you're trying to convict somebody of deliberate homicide and you don't have a body to go along with that, it can be very stressful.
What is your evidence? Can you really make it stick?
Drug surveillance video and murder. Testimony begins in the trial of a Billings man accused of killing Laura Johnson.
We sat right behind him the entire time. I was not happy at all.
He was not taking anything seriously. I don't know if he was just in disbelief, like this is really happening, so he just kind of like went numb to it.
He maintained his innocence the entire time, even though there was video being played in the courtroom of him carrying what appeared to be Laura's body out of his house.
The evidence in this case will show you that the defendant took great lengths to cover up his murder of his girlfriend, Laura.
Prosecutors present jurors with a possible motive for the brutal murder. Laura was about to permanently end her rocky relationship with Greg.
One of the things we did learn from the trial was she had moved into a separate bedroom and she was saving money to try to leave.
He acted like he was at home sitting on his couch. And yeah, he didn't care whatsoever. He thought he was like at home watching Netflix or something.
He knew exactly where the cameras were from news media. There was a moment where he turned around, looked into the lens of our camera, and gave a little smile.
Greg's behavior at the trial only adds to the heartbreak felt by Laura's family.
That if this situation didn't happen, like I could have had my mom back. She would have been living in my town. She would have been. She would have been here. It's not fair.
How will this trial pan out without evidence of Laura Johnson's body?
This case has had so many unanswered questions. It's had so much heartache with it. And there's no body, there's no murder weapon, there's no evidence that shows he actually killed her.
Two years after Laura Johnson's final moments were captured by a home security camera, a jury in Billings, Montana is set to decide whether her boyfriend, Greg Green, is guilty of murder.
This trial lasted, 2 weeks? Monday through Friday, 8 hours a day. Didn't leave that city hall building for 2 weeks, basically.
That footage was the critical piece in the investigation and in the trial. It was a piece of evidence that the jury actually got to take back with them to deliberations, to view.
You can't escape the silent witness. You can't escape that video surveillance.
Any person with common sense to see all the evidence, and especially the video, would know he was guilty. I just got home the day before, and Steven called and said, hey, they have a verdict already. We're headed back.
The jury was out maybe 2 hours.
You don't know. put 12 people in a room to make a decision and hope it's the right one.
To the charge of deliberate homicide. Guilty.
Ultimately, he was convicted of deliberate homicide. And he received a sentence of 100 years in the Montana State Prison.
In my 16-year career, this is the first case I've been involved in that went from a welfare check to a missing persons to a homicide without a body to a even prosecution of a homicide without a body.
And the fact that the contribution that we had was as impactful as it was, that's where the bittersweet part comes, you know? Had to extend ourselves that much.
Go through something you could never prepare yourself for.
Exactly.
If he didn't do that, then we would still be searching.
One of the key pivotal moments here was the persistence from family. And then Ms. Johnson's son coming to Billings and locating the surveillance footage. And I can only speculate, if that video had not been located or recovered, I'm not sure where we would be now.
Today, Stephen and his brothers are focused on keeping their mother's memory alive.
My mom was a part of my life every single day. I got married last year to my beautiful wife, Casey here. We had our daughter, Eliza, and Eliza's middle name is my mother's name. So her name is Eliza Laura Johnson. Big part of how my mom was as an everyday mother is the ways that I've been able to cope with her loss. So making the meals that she made, having the family dinners, you know, bringing her into my life in those little ways to keep her alive. That's what I do. She's there every time I make dinner, you know.
The only thing I have that I can hear her voice now is April 2018. She called me, but I was at work, and she left me a voicemail to tell me happy birthday. That's the only thing I have to hear her voice.
We still have the fact that we don't know where my mother lies to this day. That we have not been able to bring her home. We haven't had the sense of closure for peace. There's been no funeral. There's been no memorial. There's been nothing. If there's anything that anybody can tell us, if there's anything that sticks out, if there's a piece of property you own, if there's something you can do, if there's something you've seen, just, you know, to please come forward.
I'm hoping this outcome that people come forward with actual real information and it helps us find her and bring her home.